So I might say welcome to a report from CUE, Center of Urban Environmental Sustainability, that I think for most of you is a common theme. The students have seen some of the boards that I will present today already this after in Blake Hall, first floor. For a long time, those boards were sitting there. That was this project I'm presenting today. I want to say also the topic people, place, and process is about how we work and how we as landscape architects, environmental planners engage with our communities, how we care for our people, how people relate to the landscape and to the different places, and what is possible ways of planning processes that work with that. And I will go into that a little bit. I want to say a very, very special welcome to Nina Krohn, who was the project manager and the project lead on this project. And it's just amazing when you have a recent graduate who jumps right in and does not only very important, very thoughtful content work in thinking, writing, and graphics and GS, but also managing a very complex project with a number of complex, sometimes interesting players who act in interesting ways. And I think you handled them really well, and a big thank you for that. And here, in addition, thanks to members of the team are here, like I see Vincent. Thank you for being a collaborator on this in our project. I see a bunch of students, like I see Will and Tyler, and we will see some of your work in a minute. So thank you so much for being part of this project and being with this so engaged and full of initiative. Stephen Adele and Jean Epifan from Ecology were not able to be here, but they, of course, are very common collaborators who often had an important part in this. And the image that you see, some of you may have been there. This was July 4th, a couple of years ago in Highland Park. And the thought is about how we relate, how people relate to places and how can we support that. So I don't see anybody from Middlesex County right here. They were this is a project for the County of Middlesex, this Cultural Landscape and Ecosystem Services Plan, which they funded and made this all possible. I will start with the connection to teaching of this project, develop a link to the overall research questions of environmental planning, and inform how this actually informed also the approach to our planning process in this overall project. A brief summary of our understanding of ecosystem services in relationship to cultural landscapes and how those two are related and linked, and how that discussion guided our implementation suggestions, which you will see. And I will end with an outlook of where future research in environmental planning and landscape architecture could go beginning from here. So, of course, studio is the place to bring in real-world projects. Many of you will remember the junior studio about Middlesex County, and it was a great pleasure to co-teach with Vincent Javid and to discuss the topics in the classroom, have the students exposed to like the client that actually came to your presentations, discussions, and that also our project team, and Nina, you can talk about it if you want, that the work of the students was a big inspiration for us, like a good moving it forward, and that was a good integration for that. The second thing of class is actually the grads are in this right now. And the graduate seminar has a title, Landscape, Culture, and Me. Some of you may remember, like see that image. Everybody in Highland Park knows that image, knows also the conflict that was about the mural in Highland Park. But that is an example of how populations or groups relate to their hometown as an example of a cultural landscape. And in that graduate seminar, we are right now discussing what can be cultural landscape in suburbia, and that is for me currently very inspiring and in a way of bringing this topic into a graduate seminar and bringing these examples to you guys. So what is environmental planning? Can somebody say that? Some of the students, or anybody, what is environmental planning? We have a program that is called that way. Right? We have a program, and I will quote on this. Environmental planning, we describe it as an emphasis on broad educational experience, emphasizing an understanding of planning and management of the physical and cultural environment. How broad can it be? However, I hope with this presentation we'll introduce a little bit where the where the value of that is and where we can actually use that. And it's not surprising that it's so wishy-washy in a way what you described, because the planning world doesn't know what it is. It is, and so this is where I hope to set a position here where how can we describe environmental planning as a topic and as an academic field. US was strong and a forward rider in environmental protection. We all know about the national park movement, which was it's a long established, well-established tradition of environmental protection. New Jersey was a forerunner in environmental protection. We had, when I learned that, I thought it was really cute. They say that our NJDEP was established earlier than the EPA in Washington in the 1970s, like when the big environmental movement was going on. That was a really cool thing, I thought. We established the planning regions, which are very much considered examples of good environmental planning. And of course, David, you were involved with the Highlands and the Pinelands are very significant examples where actually the state took back some of the home rule rights of municipalities and decided we do a regional planning approach here. We have the initiative of smart growth. So New Jersey overall, you could think, is doing well in environmental planning and being on the forefront. One may say it's probably because it's the dirtiest place in the union. That may have a part of it to do. But still, we're good. Or one of the dirtiest places. So the big challenges, but now in all of these, is home rule and climate change. Yeah, are familiar, I think everybody who took a class with me is familiar with the term home rule, which basically says the municipality has the final decision on any land use decision, or if they want to say no plastic bags or whatever. The municipalities have a strong role in making land use decisions, and they're making the zoning of the town. The open question in all this context is when we think about how do we define cultural landscape and where does it begin and does it end, and where is that in suburbia? Is that the place that is just in between, or is that an identifiable place? These are the questions where I believe the research currently in environmental planning and landscape architecture is ongoing, and that's what I find interesting. So when we think about how to deal with the landscape, like these are the main players, and Nina and I, we came up with the term of the influencer, and of course you all know the term influencer, right? Like this is the girls and boys who sit at home in the internet and talk you into whatever buying. Here the thought is the influencer about who influences actually our landscape, who's engaging us with it, and the core, of course, the most important one is the municipalities, because they have the home rule right. But then there is a state, and there's federal, like there's landowners, of course, who have probably their property right, a big way to talk about it, and nonprofit organizations. In our project here, it is for the county. So this is a part. Our project is a part of the county master planning process, Destination 2040. That is with the County Planning Act. It's mandatory that the counties develop a plan for the strategy and development and the physical appearance of the county itself. And so we're invited to being together with colleagues from Blaustein. The planning school invited us to be part of this planning process, and our team developed first the open space plan, which is the Middlesex County Open Space and Recreation Plan, which is mandatory if you want to apply for Green Acres funding, which basically describes where are the open spaces, where are the most needed, and where we should spend money on buying them, because in reality, as you all know, the only way of preserving open spaces is buying it, in principle. This report is about nature and place, which we call the Middlesex County Cultural Landscape and Ecosystem Services Plan. And the really fascinating thing for me is that this is an opportunity to explore what are applying and components of a comprehensive landscape planning in a home rule situation. So this is the approach and the system of our planning approach. The students all know I love those diagrams, so bear with me on that one. Of course, the inventory very much in the tradition of Ian McHarg. You do your maps, you do your layers, you know people who know GIS. It's very important for me. And so you make an inventory of the environmental resources, but at the same time, you were looking at how do people actually relate to place, how they are, and I will show you examples of that. From this, we developed, our analysis was going onto the way of asking the assessment of the environmental resources using then the term ecosystem services. So what is the service an ecological system gives me as a resident? And what is the quality of that and the value of that? And out of the relationship between people and space, we were developing a definition of cultural landscape. I will get to that, and that is a big deal for us. Looking at what the opportunities in our Middlesex County landscape are, we also discovered as the biggest threat is, of course, development. You just look out of the window, go on Route 1, whatever, you see all these new development going up, and that is a significant threat, which I'll get into. And so in addressing to see how can we address the threat, how can we address the qualities of the ecosystem, the quality of cultural landscape, and in order to do that, we developed landscape types and topology, and I will introduce that in a minute. And out of those landscape types, we developed strategies. Those things are relatively common, what you see here. Of course, the habitat preservation and conservation strategies. This is where Stephen and Jean were really much leading, also the urban environmental resource improvement. The landscape part is starting with the historic and cultural assets, like very much what you do when you think about cultural landscape. But then expanding the term cultural landscape to downtown streets and to the question of open space quality, protection, and enhancement. And I will, and that gave us, those landscape types and strategies gave us actions and tactics, which I will show in a minute. And these actions and tactics then were, we have a proposal for implementation of per type or across types. Sounds a little bit abstract right now, but bear with me. I will get to that closer. And of course, it's a relationship between the implementation, the strategies, and who does what, and how are we coordinating and collaborating between like what nonprofit organization, what county administration would be working on which implementation. So as a good planner, you start with history. Look, where do we come from? Right? We looked at the traced through historic maps, put them together, and asked about, when you look at it, you kind of see, of course, our original development very much comes from like Perth Amboy and New Brunswick were like the original strong developments along the river, the waterways, and the big push came after the Second World War. With the Highway Act, with the GI Bill, this explosion of suburbia, that's what we did. And when you think 1988, it was 86, it was very much heavily, the expansion goes on, that's today, roughly today. And what we kind of see, how many open spaces got lost, and how many of these places, like how many open spaces got lost, and how many people are living very closely together. So when we look at the people, of course, the first thing that we do is look at the people. The county houses about 860,000 residents, still growing, and when you look at the population density, it is, of course, New Brunswick and Perth Amboy. And when you look at the poverty assessment, that is also the urban areas. So the south is wealthier and the north is more poor, and in a way, it kind of overall, Middlesex County is almost like a small image of New Jersey with a very urban north and a little bit rural south. So we have like the state in a little glass and with us. Looking at people and climate change, when you think about that, you could say, of course, the rich people get the trees. That's kind of a very common thing, and we have that here when you look at the overlay between pervious surfaces, tree cover, and heat island effect. So you could see that the very urban areas in the north are also suffering the most under the heat island effect. And so, meaning we need to do, like these are also industrial areas, so meaning doing some measures in industrial areas would probably be helpful for this. Thinking about people and climate change, you all have seen, you all know this image. I think all of you have experienced it, climate change, and it will get worse, and we will have more flooding. That's just what it is. It's up to us to do something about it and to prevent some of these flooding and do activities that would help that. For example, I think this was a thing that Nina really diligently worked on that map and worked on these context thing about where to develop, like where, if we cannot do everything at once, so important priorities would be to reduce these impervious surfaces, for example, at huge shopping malls. This is Woodbridge, the mall in Woodbridge, that are actually within a flood mitigation zone. So you could try to start at places where it's the most urgent to reduce impervious surfaces. So, and the flooding will be worse. However, we still have surprisingly good amounts of habitat, like places that actually are considered core habitat, that are like data that Jean and Stephen analyzed about important core habitats that are certainly valuable to protect, important fragments. Certainly when you look along Route 1 here, this is a habitat fragments that still have a significant value for populations. And what I find a little bit sad is when you look at it, the outlines, that are the preserved spaces. And so you see actually most of it is not preserved. Like most of these habitats are not preserved, so are not bought by the, this dashes here are the farmland preservation. That is the Green Acre program. They're not preserved by any of this, and this is why this is what it looks like. This land will be lost. All of it, most of it, is identified as zoned for construction. So this is looking at the zoning maps of municipalities. So like this is what our town in Highland Park, the master plan or the zoning says this is going to be developed. This is what's going to be developed. And the distinction here between the blue and the red is it within a wastewater management area or is it without? So when you look at Route 1, and actually this is not looking far into the future, all this red says all these habitats will be built up and it's zoned for development, so they're going to do this. It's the right of the property owner to do that. And there is not much we can do about this at this point. Yeah, that's kind of our situation. That's what we are facing. Thinking about people and place, how we relate. And so we started with the very classic kind of thing, look at historic properties, historic districts. I was surprised to see that this power line is actually in the historic district, which it is, and the same way as the parkway is in the historic district. However, there are these lovely things like the museum, like here. This is Cranberry, what I'm at, and so this nice downtown Cranberry. And when you look at the cultural centers, of course, New Brunswick is the hub of the cultural centers that we see. So, but we looked at a little bit more like how do people actually experience the landscape and how do they see it? And so we started to ask, we started a photo survey and asked about how would you describe, we asked what is your favorite place and what's the story you can do with that? We did the whole IRB process, however, then COVID hit. And so this is why we have this super small number of responses. Like this 229 is like almost insignificant, like can we use it or not? So I wouldn't use it for statistics, but it's about qualitative, like the narrative is, yes, people had a lot of relationship with places where they have stories and interactions, and they shared them, and the images told the story. So culturally, places where you can interact, you have a personal story, which is part of your community, those are places that our team would certainly include into the whole description, what is a cultural landscape beyond the historic preservation. And that is why we describe the cultural landscape as like the general experience of human interaction. It could be park, forests, and fields, but in the same way like downtown places, or when you think about places for shopping and work, then where do you interact? Where people are around. And so is it really the shopping mall only the place where you run from the car to the dry or air-conditioned mall? Or is it a possibility to include that in those places that they actually have a visual quality, and do they always have to be ugly? So that is a question that we looked at. Therefore, this is like our definition of a cultural landscape that we developed. And I would say a cultural landscape is an outdoor space of any scale experienced by people. The value of a cultural landscape develops from a historical significant event or era, religious correlation, or emotional response that evokes memory, identity, or spiritual connection to a place. The cultural landscape can be a natural form or entirely built. Still, it always is an outdoor space, directly or indirectly experienced by people, tied to a perceived, intangible, and subjective value based on cultural preferences. That is not exactly what the National Park Service does or the Cultural Landscape Foundation. It builds its expansion. It's expanding it. And it actually takes, for all the landscape students in here, like the writings of J.B. Jackson that you remember, are like the way J.B. Jackson described how fixing your car on your driveway is an important cultural action within the space. And so this approach to how do we interact in our spaces that J.B. Jackson described for landscape studies, we are translating that into the idea of a cultural landscape and go further than the National Park Service or the Cultural Landscape Foundation. And by the way, when I was trying to find out how many cultural landscapes the Cultural Landscape Foundation in New Jersey identifies, it's like 8. So so discussing, Sean, discussing the different definitions is exactly what is valuable in this point. So from here, we certainly went into, when you talk about the downtown characters, we looked at all the downtowns. I've seen every Middlesex County. Nina and I, we did this trip, and Vincent, we toured the county and looked at these places. And interestingly is that there's, of course, these 2 very clear urban centers. The majority are these suburban downtowns, which are in a way, most of them are somehow walkable, but you have to drive to them. So the big parking lots around them is sometimes a little bit of an issue. And then we identified 2 rural village centers. So Halmeda is one of those. That is where the surrounding is relatively rural. That's why I identified like that. However, this work revealed how important it is if there is a downtown group, like an agency or a group that cares about downtown, that actually had an impact that we could observe. With our landscape approach, looking at the whole landscape with the character of place, like looking at across the county, we of course discovered this urban, suburban, rural gradient. And in order to make this work, we developed landscape types to identify opportunities in the planning process. And so our approach was to make sure that the way we talk about cultural landscapes can be compatible with the existing system of land use planning. That's the tricky part. You can say, oh, that's all important and valuable, but how does it link and relate to the existing system of plan? So this is why, and this is like thinking of Vincent Tyler for the lead on this, and we had intensive discussions. How would you subdivide the planning or the land use categories in using spatial considerations? That's the thing here. So doing what I found very enlightening for me and was very important, that the iterative process of doing all these sketches and redrawing it was a way of exploring what can be the character of these places in a way that you can do standardized decisions. Challenge is, like for landscape architects, as you know, you can easily make like a beautiful residential garden, right? That's what you do. So you can do individual, like beautiful designs at other place. But as an environmental planner, your task is to develop planning solutions that can be applicable at different but similar situations. So that's our thing. So we actually looked also into the density, the high density, the urban higher density residential areas. Of course, then we mentioned the downtowns already a little bit here. Our image, and here this kind of shows very much where we started with, like Plainsboro is an example where actually the Plainsboro aerial image was the starting point for doing that diagram. And Plainsboro shows pretty nicely what the parking situation is. Suburban Town Center is built on Metuchen, and of course New Brunswick as a place that we all know. So we included also, as I said, we included also shopping in here. And so for two reasons. Number one, it's a lot of acres of shopping, like a lot. It's about, it's a lot of acres of shopping, plus doing something about these parking lots will have a significant impact on stormwater and flooding. And plus, these are places where people actually are. Like this is where people are every day. You can count on yourself, how often do you go shopping? It's pretty regular. And if these places were more attractive, it would be a good thing, plus where they're better connected to the neighborhood. And there are several initiatives that use parking lots for other events and moments. The commercial part, of course, the office park is that has more opportunities for of course, habitat enhancement. Campus, of course, is like our home. We include the burial grounds here. In terms of the planning rule, like the categories, they are considered they're considered, what was that? Other urban uses. So, but they're commercial run businesses. Somebody pays for you to be there, right? But they also have significant space. And so that's why we included them under commercial. They're usually not really looked at. And so that's why we included them here in this system. And of course, industrial. But I just earlier showed how bad the heat island effect and Cataract is. That is a lot of the heavy industry is there in Cataract. And so it makes sense to look at those categories. What can you actually do? And warehouse, this is the number. This is where we all are guilty. We are buying Amazon, and that's why we need warehouses. There's a direct correlation. If you want to preserve environment, don't buy at Amazon. Hopefully nobody quotes me on that. But the point is we need these warehouses for that. And meaning at the moment we have 7,000 acres of warehouse space, like of warehouse buildings plus parking here in Middlesex County. And 7,000 acres is a lot. It really is a lot. And so you do something with them has a significant impact. And of course, the yards of the light industry. Then barren land, why would we as a team consider landfills as part of cultural landscapes? Aren't they just ugly places where you dump your garbage and be with it? The point is these are large areas, large areas, and bringing them back into the suburban fabric is a big task that we have. Agriculture, we touched on this very briefly, only very important for the experience of the cultural landscape. There is number one. Number two, there's a number of really amazing agricultural experts here in our school and in our department. Plus, there's a separate farmland preservation plan within this process. So we just included it, but didn't really work on it. Parks, of course, this is like kind of where we translated the work that we did in the with the open space and recreation plan in here, but also saying that social parks, for example, there can be certainly. And I want to, of course, the nature of the golf courses. Where's our golf course? Sam, you're right there. Here you are. Golf course. Take a good piece of land. And our last open space category is the greenway. You all know the Middlesex Greenway, very successful, really lovely, important, but why is it so short? And the greenways is a great example to think about how can like this action, like it's introducing a greenway done in several landscape types. So what you see with our map, our cultural landscape map has no white spots. That's the approach, right? It has no white spots. We have 29 types that are within the 7 land use categories. And what you pretty obviously see, this pink, that's all warehouse, right? So warehouse is the dominant feature in our cultural landscape. Warehouse is the dominant feature. This is our place that we live every day. So that we should do something about it. So the vision overall is to say, yes, all land, and that's the important part, all land, including all improvements, will support an integrated, culturally significant, and ecological thriving environment through ecological habitat enhancements and quality outdoor spaces for people to foster identity, memory, and cultural meaning. When the county asked us, oh, you have to develop a vision statement, I said, oh, well, yes. However, discussing it and developing in our team and discussing it with the county was to say, yes, of course, we agree on the need for habitat improvement. We need on like reduce flooding, green infrastructure, all those kind of things. But that we as a team developed a position to foster the identity and memory of cultural meaning in a place like New Jersey. So for one approach is there to say, well, if what we learned from Sandy, for example, that communities that have a better social net, like a stable social net, are more resilient. So if the environment that we live in supports our cultural identity, supports our cultural interaction, and provides social interaction and helps to strengthen the social net, that is an active improvement of resilience. So with all these landscape types, we then develop those strategies, actions, and tactics. And I know that Gesa hates it when I put so many words on the slide. I can get it. However, bear with me for that moment. The strategies are within this ecosystem services thought. The same way we develop strategies and actions for the cultural landscape component, like I did in this little diagram with these boxes. Went through that. However, when you look at tactics, which mean the individual implementation, that can be per landscape type, and I will show examples, and can be across type. And when you do something like street and parking lot trees, it's kind of arbitrary where you put it, because they are good for they are definitely like green infrastructure. They improve the urban environment. They reduce the heat island effect. They improve habitat. They invite people to hang out in the shade, so they support cultural spaces. So we put them at one place, and that can be wider. So when I take that example of the trees, for all of these, all over 45 tactics, we developed like a description in terms of what are the benefits from the environmental component and the cultural component. So whatever you do good for the environment, you almost always also improve the cultural quality of a place. And when you do something for the cultural quality of the place, you may also enhance the environment. And so that link and that interaction is for all of our 45 tactics developed. Short term means, yes, you should get started. And when we talk about the priority locations, where does it make sense to start first? That's kind of the thing. You want to do the good thing and you have limited money, so where do you start first? That's why we described those. And with our client, the discussion was which department or group within the county should be the lead. And it was an interesting exploration to try to understand how does a county administration work. And proud I can say, I don't know. So I don't know how, I really have no clear understanding how they are. However, we developed a system how which county office should be the lead in this. And then, of course, planting street trees is applying to many, many types. And of course, the influencers we listed. And for each of these tactics, added resources where you could further information. So when I look at the trees, it's pretty obvious that there can be in a suburban development, but in the same way also at the strip mall. Like this is the same thing that applies to different types. Interesting or important is also at the strip mall or at the malls, like when I said 7,000 acres, if you reduce parking here, if you probably combine the parking with solar panels and electric vehicle charging stations, you can go a long way. There's a lot of opportunity here to do. We did the same thing in terms of applying all the solutions to those tactics to the office park, and sorry, the 7,000 acres were the warehouse tactics, to say this is a little bit like for an environmentalist and a planner, like the kind of the kid in the candy store approach here. What are the great things you can do? But then our task was to list them and say, okay, these are the things you can do. It's up to you to do it. However, we show it is possible. It's spatially possible and it makes sense. And we did a number of calculations how much, for example, reducing impervious surface would reduce runoff and would reduce flooding. So you have a clear correlation for that. When I think about the burial ground and the social parks, for the burial grounds, we reduced the initiatives in terms of additional tree plantings because these are just wide, most of them are wide open spaces doing that. And the social parks, when I say all these improvement opportunities, I want to make clear, when we did our inventory of the Middlesex County park system, they are in a really good shape and they're doing well in maintenance, and the bathrooms are always open. So there's a generally good foundation, but adapting the parks for climate change, for floodable areas in the parks, and reducing still in some of that park and some of them impervious surfaces is still a good amount of things to do. And on those spaces also, the greenway implementation is to say you could probably have a greenway next to a burial ground, or certainly definitely as the parks, social parks or other parks, as important stepping stones for a greenway system. And that's my last big thing, that we developed a system of greenway opportunities, starting with what is actually a quality visual experience. And that's one of the maps that Nina is really, really proud of for good reasons. That was so when you think about the experience of walking or bicycle riding on a greenway, if it is actually visually attractive and you have view sheds and views, that's an important experience. So we started with that. This is a contour, the underlying map is a contour map, so you think about topography and how much you can see. Then the idea is, of course, connecting farmland and open spaces and all those good things that you use what you have, but sometimes it doesn't work. And we had long discussions in places and discussions with some municipalities, how do you go better around the corner? So sometimes it has to be an on-road connection or something of that kind. So out of this, we developed an overall greenway opportunities concept. So we have these 49 sections, and they would be on existing, like when we talk about existing greenways, meaning there are paths or opportunities within parks that you could actually easily use, where it probably needs improvement, or where we actually have to go on the street. Important is that this whole greenway concept doesn't think just, okay, put an asphalt path down. It has the idea and the concept to say, also like have these connections also that function as habitat connections between different important parts and functions for people. This is actually about, James, we just talked about this image in the other class. It was about what's the challenge of putting a path under a power line. So actually you can do it, and they do this in Mercer County. And this is actually the transmission line historic district. It is an historic district. This is an historic district, this transmission line. But it would also serve, and the way we looked at it, it would serve very well also for the neighborhoods that you not always need your car to get to work. Like not always. And that is, so that is part of this overall greenway system to say what are other ways and opportunities to use the bicycle or use that greenway connection. So put it all together in one plan. That was the challenge, and that's the thing that, as you know, that the students know, I really like to have one big plan. Everything is in, and you kind of see how things are correlating. So our approach with putting it down here is to say these are, when we're talking about these primary target areas for where actions are particularly, particularly needed here in the north, in terms of the actions concerning the heat island effect and those things. We have the Greenway route in here, downtown street system target groups. Where would be priority areas for solar? Where is a focus on land conservation and land for acquisition for the Green Acres program? Kind of trying to put the environmentalist candy store into one plan. The important thing here is not to forget, or the important thing is that what we developed is supposed to be, or is a flexible planning tool. When all the information that I shared a little bit, but all of this, if somebody in a town has these reports in front of them, it is easier for them to make land use decisions. If some of them at the county planning board has these things in front of them, they can use them for their planning decisions. So it's not, you have to do this or that. It's an idea of a flexible planning tool. At the same time, it's a call to action, showing and outlining what is possible and how the county administration, the towns, the state, the federal government, private landowners and NGOs can actually work together. And this is where the term influencer becomes important for me. How can we influence all the actors to do it? And the government has a lot of opportunity. Government can do a lot. And that's what I learned on this project. The influence that the state, the county, and municipalities have is much bigger. We had this discussion after we had the Barnegie Bay film here. And this had this little bit, almost like anti-government twist to it. And it was a little bit frustrated, oh, we can't do anything. For everybody in this room, you're professionals being part of the getting an education or work in the field of influencing government in one way or the other. You are the decision makers at some point, and these kind of things are what you can actually do in a way. So this brings me to my outlook. So there's no time for waiting anymore. Climate change is happening and action is absolutely super urgent. And not the next time when Route 18 is flooded. It is about, we need to bring like all the people who have to leave the shore, they have to live somewhere, and we have to bring them. We will also not change home rule. That is very clear. We will not change home rule. In New Jersey, the home rule is kind of ingrained in the character of the state more than another state. So we will not change that. So that's why a flexible planning tool approach is probably the right thing to do. And just throw it in there that COVID showed us the essential importance of open space for public health. That was a clear message. And we also had some public health discussions within the project that I mentioned just now to say the open spaces were places where people could actually meet even under those situations, these conditions. That's why this consideration, what's the cultural landscape in this white is very open. And I mean this, the cultural landscape approach as a meaningful, that meaningful places strengthen community resiliency. There's a message that I learned in this very much for me, to say if we support places for interaction of people at any other places and follow like the J.B. Jackson ideas of that regular, something where you fix your car or you do something outside meet other people is a place where culture actually happens and where interaction happens. So in the outlook for research, as I see the research dean is here, the outlook is I believe our school is a great place to strengthen the collaboration between science, planning, and design. I threw in a whole bunch of knowledge I have no idea about. I'm not a climate scientist. I'm not a hydrologist. I'm not a habitat expert. I showed all these I'm not a GIS expert. So I showed all these amazing maps and all these knowledge in order to support the process of finding good solutions. And this is for me an example of a good teamwork of that. We just discussed it, and develop a new advanced environmental planning class, because you might believe, I really believe in it, and I believe it needs to be pushed forward. We need a good education that does that, and we will change one of our classes in order to foster this. And my personal next research is like the investigation of other planning approaches to suburban cultural landscapes in the US and international. And so by now I have a pretty good understanding how we could do this in Middlesex County. But I would like to know more, like on this base, explore how other people do it, and of course, maybe we can do it better. On that note, thank you so much for your